The house after the funeral. The letter my father never wanted me to read. The house felt different without him. Not empty, not abandoned, just quiet. The kind of silence that only appears after someone has been part of your life for so long that you can't imagine the world without hearing their footsteps. For 28 years, my father had lived in this house. Every morning, he brewed coffee at exactly 6:30. Every Sunday, he watered the flowers behind the kitchen window. Every evening, he locked the front door twice before going to bed. Now the coffee maker was cold. The flowers had begun to wilt, and the keys still hung beside the door, untouched. 3 days had passed since the funeral. Family members had gone home. Neighbors had stopped bringing food. The sympathy calls had become less frequent. Life outside continued as if nothing had happened. But inside the old house, time refused to move. Coming home, I hadn't planned on staying. The original idea was simple: sort through Dad's belongings, meet with the lawyer, sell the house, return to Chicago, continue living the life I'd built hundreds of miles away. It sounded easy when I said it aloud. It wasn't. Every room reminded me of something. The hallway where Dad taught me to ride my first bicycle indoors during a thunderstorm. The kitchen where he burned pancakes almost every Saturday but insisted they tasted fine. The garage where we spent entire summers fixing an old Mustang that never actually worked. Every wall carried memories. Some made me smile. Others hurt more than I expected. Grief is strange. It doesn't arrive all at once. It waits, then finds you in ordinary moments. Opening a closet, finding an old jacket, hearing the floor creak exactly the way it always had. My father never threw anything away. Dad believed every object had a story. Old watches, broken radios, receipts from restaurants that no longer existed, birthday cards, movie tickets, boxes filled with things most people would have thrown away years earlier. He called them memories. I called them clutter. Standing in the attic surrounded by dozens of dusty boxes, I realized he had probably won that argument. Each object reminded him of someone, or somewhere, or some moment he never wanted to lose. I spent hours sorting through everything. Old tax records, family photographs, military medals that had belonged to my grandfather, my elementary school drawings, a baseball glove so worn it barely resembled leather anymore. Every item whispered another piece of our family's history, but none of them explained something that had quietly bothered me for years. The man who never spoke about himself. Growing up, I knew almost everything about my father's habits. His favorite songs, his favorite meal, his favorite baseball team, but I knew surprisingly little about his younger life. Whenever I asked about college, he changed the subject. When I mentioned old girlfriends, he smiled and laughed it away. If I asked about my mother before they married, he answered with only a sentence or two. As a child, I never questioned it. As an adult, it seemed strange. My father could spend an hour telling stories about repairing lawn mowers, yet somehow avoided speaking about the first 30 years of his own life. I had always assumed those memories simply weren't important to him. Now, I wasn't so sure. The lawyer's visit. The next afternoon, Dad's lawyer arrived carrying a thick folder. Most of the meeting was exactly what I expected. Insurance papers, property documents, bank accounts, routine legal formalities. Then he paused. "There is one thing your father mentioned." I looked up. He said that if you ever decided to renovate the house. The lawyer hesitated. "He hoped you wouldn't." I frowned. "That's oddly specific." He didn't explain why. That was it. No further details. Just one unusual request. Don't renovate the house. At the time, it seemed meaningless. Within 24 hours, I would understand why. A loose wooden panel. The following morning, I began cleaning the upstairs hallway. The house was old, nearly 80 years old. Some of the wooden panels along the walls had started separating from the plaster. While moving an old bookshelf, I accidentally bumped one of them. Something sounded different. Not solid. Hollow. Curious, I pressed against the wood. It shifted slightly. I pulled harder. The narrow panel came loose. Behind it, there was a small hidden space between the wall studs. At first, I thought it might simply contain old wiring. Instead, I saw a small metal box covered in dust. My heartbeat quickened. The box. It wasn't locked. The hinges squeaked softly as I opened it. Inside were only three things: an old silver pocket watch, a faded black and white photograph, and a sealed envelope. The photograph showed my father, much younger, maybe 25 years old, standing beside a woman I had never seen before. They were smiling. Not the polite smile people give cameras. A genuine one. The kind people wear when they're deeply in love. I turned the picture over. Only one sentence had been written in blue ink. Summer, 1982. Nothing else. No names. No location. Just a date. Then I looked at the envelope. My name. The envelope was yellow with age. Its edges had begun to curl. Across the front, written in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were just 6 words. For my son. Below that, my name. No stamp. No address. It had never been mailed. It had been hidden. Carefully. Deliberately. For decades. My hands suddenly felt cold. Why would my father hide a letter meant for me? Why not simply give it to me? Or leave it with the lawyer? Or place it inside his will? Why conceal it behind a wall where no one might ever find it? I stared at the envelope for several minutes. Part of me wanted to open it immediately. Another part was afraid. Because deep down, I already knew something. People don't hide letters unless they're hiding the truth. The decision. I carried the box downstairs, made a cup of coffee, sat in my father's old chair. The house was silent. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. The envelope rested on the table in front of me, untouched. For nearly 40 years, whatever was inside had remained hidden. One decision had protected that secret. Now, another decision could uncover it. I slowly reached for the envelope, slipped my finger beneath the seal, and began to open the letter my father had never wanted me to read. The name inside the letter. The letter my father never wanted me to read. For several long seconds, I couldn't move. The envelope rested in my hands, impossibly light for something that suddenly felt so heavy. Outside, rain continued tapping softly against the kitchen window. The old clock above the refrigerator ticked with steady precision. Everything in the house remained exactly the same, except me, because I knew that whatever waited inside those folded pages would change the way I remembered my father forever. I took a slow breath, carefully unfolded the letter, and began to read. If you're reading this. The first line stopped me immediately. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it also means you found the place I hoped you never would. I blinked. Found the place. He had hidden the letter on purpose. Not because he wanted me to read it. Because he hoped I never would. My father had built that wall himself nearly 30 years earlier during a renovation. He had hidden the box with his own hands, then covered it, painted over it, gone on with his life as though it had never existed. I kept reading. I've carried this secret longer than you've been alive. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family photograph. I wondered if today would be the day I finally told you the truth. My throat tightened. Dad had always looked calm, confident, steady. Never once had I imagined that every family memory carried something he couldn't bring himself to say. The woman in the photograph. Halfway down the first page, I found her name. Her name was Emily. Emily. I whispered it aloud. It meant nothing to me. No aunt, no cousin, no family friend. I'd never heard my father say that name. Not once. The letter continued. Before I met your mother. Before you were born. Emily was the person I believed I would spend my life with. I stared at the words. For 28 years, I had believed my parents' story began when they met at a charity fundraiser in 1986. Apparently, it hadn't. There had been another life before ours. Another future. One that somehow disappeared without anyone ever mentioning it. A different man. The farther I read, the less my father resembled the man I thought I knew. He described being 24 years old, working construction during the day, taking night classes, saving money to buy a small house. Emily worked as a nurse at the local hospital. According to him, she laughed louder than anyone he'd ever met. She loved thunderstorms. She hated coffee. She insisted pancakes tasted better for dinner than breakfast. I smiled despite myself. Those tiny details felt painfully real. They didn't read like fiction. They read like memories someone had protected for decades. Then the tone of the letter changed. The night everything changed. One night changed everything. No explanation followed immediately. Instead, several paragraphs described silence, regret, fear. Then another sentence. I made a decision because I believed I was protecting everyone. I spent the next 40 years wondering if I had actually destroyed everything instead. I read that sentence 3 times. Protecting who? Destroyed what? My father still refused to explain. Even now, it was as though he struggled to write the words. I turned the page. A hidden address. Tucked between the second and third sheets of paper was something else. A small folded receipt. Old, brittle, yellow with age. On the back, an address had been written by hand. Not in my father's handwriting. Someone else's. Maple Street, Cedar Falls. The town sounded familiar. Then I remembered. Cedar Falls was nearly 3 hours away. We had driven through it dozens of times on family vacations. Never once had Dad suggested stopping there. Now I wondered why. More questions than answers. The final page of the letter ended abruptly. Not with an explanation. Not with a confession. Only another request. If you decide to learn the truth, don't begin with me. Begin with Emily. Below that, one final sentence. She deserves to be heard before I ever am. Then, nothing. No signature. No goodbye. No explanation. Just silence. I looked again at the photograph. Emily stood beside my father smiling into the summer sun. She couldn't have been older than 25. If she were still alive, she would now be in her 60s. My mother's voice. That evening I drove to my mother's house. The entire trip, the letter sat on the passenger seat beside me. I hadn't called ahead. I didn't know what I was going to ask, or whether I even wanted answers. She opened the front door wearing an old gray sweater. The moment she saw my face, she frowned. What's wrong? I held up the photograph. Who is Emily? Everything changed. My mother didn't look confused. She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't study the photograph. Instead, the color disappeared from her face. She slowly sat down without saying a word. For nearly a full minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered something I never expected to hear. I always knew you'd find out someday. The truth she never told. I stared at her. You knew. She nodded. Tears filled her eyes almost instantly. I asked your father to tell you himself. When? Years ago. Why didn't he? She looked toward the kitchen window. I don't think he ever forgave himself. I felt my pulse racing. Forgave himself for what? She closed her eyes, then quietly said, because Emily wasn't just someone he loved. Another long silence filled the room. When she finally looked back at me, she spoke 6 words that turned my entire world upside down. She was supposed to be your mother. The room seemed to disappear. Every memory I had ever trusted suddenly felt uncertain. The man I had buried only days earlier had taken an entire lifetime of truth with him. Who was Emily? What happened in 1982? Why had my father lived with this secret for 40 years? And why did my own mother seem to know more than she had ever admitted? I realized the letter wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The life my father hid. The letter my father never wanted me to read. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same photograph. My father, young, smiling, standing beside a woman named Emily. Then I heard my mother's voice again. She was supposed to be your mother. The words refused to leave my mind. For 28 years, I believed I knew where my life had begun. Now, it felt like someone had quietly rewritten the first chapter without telling me. By sunrise, I had already made my decision. I was going to Cedar Falls. The address. The drive took almost 3 hours. The farther I left the city behind, the smaller the roads became. Cornfields stretched toward the horizon. Old gas stations appeared every 20 miles. Tiny churches stood beside forgotten highways. Nothing about Cedar Falls looked remarkable. It was the kind of town people pass through without remembering. According to the latest census, fewer than 5,000 people still lived there. My father had never once mentioned it. Not once in my entire life. Yet somehow, a piece of his heart had remained here for more than 40 years. Maple Street. The address led me to a small white house at the end of a quiet street. The paint had faded. Flowers grew beneath the windows. A wind chime gently moved above the porch. Everything about the place felt peaceful. Ordinary. I sat in my car for almost 5 minutes before gathering the courage to knock. An elderly woman answered. She looked to be in her late 60s. Gray hair, kind eyes, a gentle smile. The moment she looked at me, her smile disappeared. She didn't ask who I was. Instead, she whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. Michael? Michael. My father's name, mistaken for a ghost. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Finally, I said softly, "I'm sorry. My name is Daniel." She blinked, studied my face again, then covered her mouth with one trembling hand. My God. You have his eyes. Not. Who are you? Not. Can I help you? She already knew. Or at least, she knew exactly who my father had been. I think. I swallowed. I think you knew my father. She closed her eyes. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she stepped aside. You'd better come in. Emily. The living room felt frozen in time. Bookshelves lined the walls. Old records rested beside a vintage turntable. Framed photographs filled every available space. Some showed mountains. Others showed lakes. Family gatherings. Birthday parties. Then, I saw him. My father. Not one picture. Several. Young. Laughing. Fishing beside a lake. Standing in front of an old pickup truck. Celebrating Christmas. He looked completely different from the quiet man I had grown up with. He looked happy. Emily noticed where I was looking. He hated having his picture taken. I laughed softly. So did the man I knew. She smiled for the first time. He didn't always. 40 years of silence. We sat together in silence. Eventually I placed the letter on the coffee table. She stared at it for a long time. I always wondered if he'd write one. You knew. She nodded. He wanted to. Then why didn't he send it? Emily looked toward the window. Because your father believed that telling the truth would destroy too many lives. I frowned. My mother said something similar. Emily sighed. He spent 40 years punishing himself. The accident. She stood and walked toward an old wooden cabinet. Inside was another small box. Unlike my father's. This one wasn't hidden. She carefully opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, hospital documents, several photographs. One headline immediately caught my attention. Local couple involved in highway accident. The date, August 14, 1982. The same summer written on the back of the photograph. Emily gently touched the newspaper. We were driving home. She paused. It was raining. A truck crossed the center line. My parents were killed instantly. I looked up. And you? I survived. She rolled up her sleeve. A long scar stretched across her forearm. The doctors weren't sure I would. The decision that changed everything. Emily's voice became quieter. When I finally woke up, I wasn't alone. Your father was sitting beside my hospital bed. He hadn't left for 4 days. I smiled. That sounded exactly like him. He told me everything would be okay. Another silence. Then tears filled her eyes. But he was wrong. I didn't interrupt. He blamed himself. For what? Because he was driving. I stared at her. He survived with barely a scratch. She looked down. I lost my parents. My career stopped. My life completely changed. And your father decided that he had ruined mine. He walked away. I begged him not to leave. Emily whispered. I told him the accident wasn't his fault. But guilt doesn't listen to reason. She smiled sadly. He visited less often. Then once a week. Then once a month. And one day, he simply stopped coming. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He disappeared. He thought I deserved someone who hadn't destroyed my future. I remembered something from the letter. I believed I was protecting everyone. Suddenly, it made sense. At least part of it. The truth about my mother. What happened after that? Emily looked at me. A year later. I heard he'd met someone. My mother. She nodded. I was happy for him. You were. She smiled through tears. I loved him. And loving someone sometimes means hoping they find peace. Even if it isn't with you. I had expected anger, bitterness, resentment. Instead, she spoke about my father with kindness, as though she had forgiven him decades ago, even if he had never forgiven himself. One final question. As I prepared to leave, I stopped at the front door. There was something else in the letter. Emily looked at me. He wrote, "You deserve to be heard before I ever am." She smiled sadly. He always thought he was the villain. Weren't you angry? She looked at the old photograph resting on the shelf. For a while. Then I realized something. What? He wasn't hiding from me. He was hiding from himself. As I walked back toward my car, I noticed something lying inside the box Emily had shown me. A small leather notebook. My father had written his name inside the cover. Emily followed my eyes. You should take it. What is it? She looked at me for several long seconds. It's the diary he kept. During the year he disappeared from everyone's life. I slowly opened the first page. The very first sentence read, "If Daniel ever reads this, he'll finally understand what I did to his brother." I froze. My brother? I didn't have a brother. Or at least, I had believed I didn't. The truth about my brother. The letter my father never wanted me to read. I read the sentence again. Then a third time. My hands began to shake. If Daniel ever reads this, he'll finally understand what I did to his brother. My brother. The words made no sense. I was an only child. At least, that was what I had believed for 28 years. I slowly looked up at Emily. There has to be some mistake. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gently closed the notebook. There isn't. The room suddenly felt smaller, harder to breathe in. What brother? Emily lowered her eyes. Your father wanted to tell you himself. Tell me what? She took a long breath. The boy survived. A secret buried for 40 years. For several seconds, I simply stared at her. The boy. Emily nodded. The accident. My heartbeat quickened. I don't understand. There was another car. I frowned. What? The truck didn't only hit us. She reached into the box again. This time she removed another newspaper clipping. The headline was faded, but still readable. 3 vehicles involved in deadly highway collision. 3 vehicles. Not 2. The article described heavy rain, poor visibility, multiple fatalities, several survivors. I had read the first article. It had never mentioned another family. Emily quietly continued. A young couple was driving home with their little boy. They died instantly. Their son survived. The hospital. Emily spoke slowly, as though every word still hurt after 40 years. The little boy had no relatives. No grandparents. No uncles. No one willing to take him. He was only 3 years old. I felt my stomach tighten. What happened to him? She looked toward the old photograph again. Your father visited him every day. I suddenly remembered something. Dad always became strangely emotional whenever he saw children alone. Hospitals, orphanages, television stories. As a child, I never understood why. Now, I was beginning to. The choice. The police investigated the accident. Emily continued. They concluded that the truck driver was responsible. So Dad wasn't guilty? No. Not legally. But he never believed that. She smiled sadly. He kept saying, if I had taken a different road. If we had left 5 minutes later. If I had noticed the truck sooner. He carried every possibility inside him. Every impossible version of the past. Until one day, he made a decision. A new family. He adopted the boy. The words echoed through the room. I couldn't speak. He believed he owed him a life. Emily's voice trembled. He couldn't save the boy's parents. So he decided. He would become one. I whispered, the little boy. Was me. Emily nodded. Tears filled both our eyes. Yes. For 28 years. I had believed I was my father's biological son. I wasn't. He had chosen me. Not because he had to. Because he couldn't bear leaving another child alone. Why nobody told me. I drove straight to my mother's house. She opened the door before I even knocked. One look at my face. And she knew. You saw Emily. I nodded. Then quietly asked, am I adopted? She closed her eyes. Yes. The answer came so softly it almost disappeared. I felt strangely calm. Not angry. Not yet. Just empty. Why? She invited me inside. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd confronted her only 2 nights earlier. She reached for my hand. Because your father asked me for one thing. What? He asked me to love you. As though you had always been ours. The promise. He wanted you to have a normal childhood. She smiled through tears. No whispers. No pity. No feeling that you were different. He said. She paused. That parents aren't the people who bring you into the world. They're the people who stay. Suddenly memories flooded back. Every baseball game. Every school concert. Every birthday. Every broken bicycle. Every late-night conversation after heartbreak. Every time Dad showed up. Every time he stayed. Not because biology demanded it. Because love did. The hidden truth. Then why keep it secret? My mother looked toward the family photographs hanging on the wall. At first. He thought we'd tell you when you were older. But every year became harder. When you turned 10. It seemed too soon. When you turned 15. He worried you'd hate him. When you graduated. He planned to tell you. He even wrote the letter. The same letter? She nodded. But every time he looked at you. He lost his courage. The last entry. That night I returned to my father's house. The diary still lay where I had left it. I opened the final pages. The handwriting had become shakier. His health had already begun to decline. The last complete entry read, being your father has been the greatest privilege of my life. Then another sentence. I stopped being afraid of losing you years ago. I smiled through tears. The next line broke me completely. I became afraid you'd stop calling me Dad. Couldn't hold back anymore. For the first time since the funeral. I cried. Not because I had discovered a lie. Because I had finally understood the truth. One final gift. Hidden inside the diary's back cover was one last envelope. Smaller than the first. Across the front, my father had written only 2 words. Open last. My hands trembled as I carefully unfolded the paper inside. Contained only a few short lines. Blood gave you life. Love made us family. If you've read this far, then you already know the only truth that ever mattered. At the bottom, one final sentence. One I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Thank you for letting me be your dad. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the old photograph of my father and Emily. For the first time in days, the silence inside the house no longer felt empty, felt peaceful, because I finally understood that my father hadn't hidden the truth because he was ashamed of me. He hid it because he loved me so deeply that he feared the truth might take away the one word he treasured most. Dad. And no letter, no secret, no revelation could ever change that. What the letter was really for. The letter my father never wanted me to read. A week passed before I returned to the old house. For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't coming to sort through boxes, or sign paperwork, or make difficult decisions. I was coming because, somehow, the house no longer felt like a place filled with secrets. It felt like the place where I had finally found the truth. The same kitchen, the same creaking floorboards, the same worn leather chair where my father had spent countless evenings reading the newspaper. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Only I was different. Selling the house. The realtor called that afternoon. We've already had 3 offers. I looked around the living room. Sunlight poured through the old windows. Dust floated quietly through the air. For years, I had imagined selling the house without thinking twice. Now, I couldn't imagine handing the keys to strangers. Every scratch in the wooden floor told part of our family's story. The mark beside the staircase where I crashed my bicycle at 12. The pencil lines inside the pantry measuring my height every birthday. The faded stain on the dining room ceiling from the Christmas when Dad tried fixing the upstairs plumbing himself. This wasn't just a house. It was proof that someone had spent 25 years building a home for a child who wasn't born his, but whom he loved exactly the same. I called the realtor back. I'm taking it off the market. There was a long pause. Are you sure? For the first time all week. I smiled. Completely. Returning to Cedar Falls. A few days later, I drove back to see Emily. This time, I didn't bring questions. I brought photographs, boxes filled with family memories, birthday parties, camping trips, graduation day, Christmas mornings. Emily sat beside me on the porch for hours as we looked through every picture. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she quietly wiped away tears. This one. She pointed toward a photograph of my father teaching me to fish. He always wanted to take someone to that lake. He told you that? She nodded. He used to dream about teaching his own son. I looked down at the picture. He did. Emily smiled softly. Yes, he really did. The truth about forgiveness. Before I left, I finally asked the question that had been sitting inside me since we first met. Did you ever forgive him? Emily looked across the empty street. I forgave him years ago. Then why didn't you try to find him? She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she answered. Because loving someone doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes, it means letting them become the person they believe they need to be. I thought about that all the way home. Maybe forgiveness wasn't forgetting. Maybe it wasn't pretending nothing had happened. Maybe forgiveness meant refusing to let pain decide the rest of your life. A visit to the cemetery. The following Sunday, I visited my father's grave. For nearly 20 minutes. I said nothing. The wind moved gently through the trees. Birds sang somewhere beyond the cemetery. I placed the photograph of Dad and Emily against the headstone. Beside it, I laid the final letter. Then I spoke. You were wrong. The words surprised even me. You thought I'd stop calling you Dad. I smiled through tears. I don't even know what else to call you. Because fathers weren't defined by DNA. They were defined by every ordinary day that nobody else noticed. Every school pickup. Every scraped knee. Every bedtime story. Every sacrifice made without expecting anything in return. He hadn't given me life. He had given me a childhood. And those are not always the same thing. The last surprise. As I turned to leave, my phone rang. It was the lawyer. I found something. I thought we'd already gone through everything. So did I. He laughed softly. There was a safety deposit box. I didn't know about it. Neither did I. Apparently, your father rented it decades ago. Inside, there was only one item. What was it? A birth certificate. I closed my eyes. My original one? Yes. And, on the back, your father wrote something. The final words. Later that afternoon, I opened the document. There, on the reverse side, written in fading blue ink, were my father's final handwritten words. Families aren't born. They are built. One choice. One sacrifice. One act of love at a time. Below those words, he had written today's date. Not the day he adopted me. Not the day I was born. The day he first called himself my father. I realized something extraordinary. For all those years, he hadn't celebrated the day he became a parent because of paperwork. He celebrated the day he made the decision to love a frightened little boy for the rest of his life. Final ending. People often ask what makes someone a parent. Is it blood? Is it genetics? Is it a name written on a birth certificate? 4 years. I believed the answer was obvious. Now I know better. A father is the person who stays. The person who teaches you how to ride a bicycle. Who waits outside the principal's office. Who sits beside your hospital bed. Who works overtime so you can attend college. Who quietly sacrifices dreams you'll never even know existed. And sometimes, a father is a man carrying so much guilt that he spends 40 years believing the truth might cost him the only title he ever truly wanted. Dad. I still visit his grave every year. I still keep both letters inside the same wooden box where he hid them decades ago. Not because I want to remember the secret, but because I want to remember the lesson. The greatest inheritance my father ever left me wasn't a house. It wasn't money. It wasn't even the letters. It was the understanding that love is not something we inherit. It's something we choose. Every single day. And if he could hear me now, there is only one thing I would say. Thank you, Dad.